Primary rule, water buys time, but it never keeps it. I learned that before everything collapsed, watching pump gauges creep a needle width at a time while nothing else moved. Water doesn't rush unless it's been ignored. It just accumulates leverage. That rule is under pressure now. I woke before dawn, same as always. Not to an alarm. Never use one, but to the sound of line tension changing. A soft, uneven knock where the dockhouse shifts against its anchors when the water level isn't where it was supposed to be overnight. I lay still and counted the rhythm. Slower than wind-driven chop. Too regular to be random. Drop again. I pulled on boots and stepped out onto the narrow deck that wraps the stone mound. The quarry was flat and dark, mist hanging low over the water like it was trying to decide whether to lift or settle back in. The shoreline was farther away than it had been 3 days ago, not by much. A few feet, maybe. Enough to matter. I checked the anchor lines first. 4 primary, 2 secondary. Steel cable with redundancy knots I tied myself, not trusting factory crimps after seeing what constant submersion does to them. 2 lines had slack. I didn't log yesterday. Not wind slack. Vertical slack. Water had fallen overnight again. I tightened them back to spec by feel, not measurement. Measurements lie when your reference plane is moving. Before the shutdowns, my job was to keep water where it belonged, or at least slow it down enough that the rest of the operation could pretend it was stable. Pumps ran constantly in the quarry deep sump units, pulling groundwater seep and rain runoff, discharging it out through channels nobody ever thought about until they stopped working. When the towns emptied and the grid went intermittent, the pumps went silent. The pit filled fast. Faster than anyone expected. Roads disappeared in days. Equipment yards went under next. The central rock mound, the one this dockhouse hubs, became an island by accident. I didn't leave when the others did. I ferried scrap lumber and tools out on the maintenance barge before the water rose too high to launch it safely. Built the dockhouse low, ugly, and functional. From shore it reads as debris. From the water it looks like a forgotten platform. That ambiguity is deliberate. After the lines, I checked the generator housing. Dry. No new corrosion bloom on the exhaust. I only run it in short, predictable bursts, same hour, same duration, so the noise folds into the quarry's natural echoes. Sound behaves oddly here. It skims the water, reflects off stone walls, and comes back distorted. You learn to read it the way you read gauges. I pulled the nets next, waited, set at dusk, always pulled before sunrise. 2 carp, 1 small catfish. Enough. I cleaned them quickly and rinsed everything in quarry water well away from the dockhouse. Smell discipline matters more than hunger. As the light came up, I walked the exposed strip of rock. That strip wasn't there last week. It's a narrow band, slick and dark, hugging the shoreline like the quarry is exhaling. Wet stone still remembers pressure. You can read it if you know what to look for. Algae smear, water lines, the way grit settles in shallow depressions. That's where I saw the prints. Boots. Human. Heavy enough to press into the wet stone, but not so deep they broke the surface. They came from the direction of the old access road, followed the strip toward the island, and stopped just short of the water. No hesitation marks. No scuff where someone reconsidered. Just a clean stop, toes pointed toward me. They didn't try to cross. That's what bothers me. The dead would have kept going until they fell in. Living people usually test water, throw a rock, poke with a stick, do something to turn uncertainty into data. These prints stopped like the person already knew how far was too far. I stood there longer than I should have, watching the mist thin and the quarry walls come into focus. The water line was lower everywhere, not just here. Exposed rock formed a broken ring around the pit, interrupted only where the walls dropped too steep to hold a ledge. Quarries don't have tides. They have balance points. Inflow versus seepage. Pump versus gravity. Something is changing that balance. Either water is finding a new way out, or something upstream is diverting it. Old drainage tunnels. Fractured rock. Or human intervention where the pumps used to be. Isolation works here because water rewrites distance. It filters movement, forces commitment, buys warning. As long as there's water between me and shore, I have time to decide. But water dropping doesn't announce itself loudly. It just leaves things exposed long enough for someone else to notice. I walked back to the dockhouse and wrote nothing down, not yet. Logs create false confidence if you don't know what variables are still in play. The footprints will dry by afternoon. The strip of rock will widen if the level keeps falling. If it widens enough, someone won't stop at the edge next time. Primary rule still holds, water buys time, but it never keeps it. I need to figure out how much time the quarry is giving me, and whether reinforcing this island costs more than abandoning it before it stops being one. Secondary rule. If water moves without weather, assume intent somewhere in the system. I didn't touch the generator that day. Not because I didn't need the charge. I did. But because sound is a question mark when the baseline changes. The quarry has its own acoustics at full pool. Lower the water, and those reflections shift. Noise that used to smear now carries clean, and clean sound draws straight lines. Instead, I spent the morning watching the margins. Water level dropped another inch by noon. I know, because the lichened line on the stone face behind the dockhouse doesn't lie. It takes years to form and seconds to expose. That line had been submerged for months. Now it was dry enough to chalk under my fingers. No rain upstream overnight. No heavy wind to drive surface loss. Evaporation at these temperatures is negligible, so the water is leaving. I followed the shoreline with binoculars from the deck, slow sweep, no fixation. The exposed strip was wider now in a few places, broken by shallow channels where water still seeped back into the pit. Those channels are important. They tell you where pressure is equalizing, not where it's failing. The footprints from the morning were already softening, edges rounding as the stone dried. But there were more now. 2 sets. Same direction. Same stopping point. Still no testing marks. Someone is measuring. I spent the afternoon on maintenance that doesn't announce itself. Retied 2 anchor knots with different bite patterns so any later inspection would show change. Shifted the barge's tie-off point of foot to port to alter its shadow line. Small geometry changes break visual memory. I also checked the old pump intake locations on the far wall through the scope. Dark mouths in the stone, half submerged. Those intakes used to pull thousands of gallons an hour when the system was live. If one of those tunnels is cleared, naturally or by hand, the pit would drain slow and steady, exactly like this. Slow is worse than fast. Fast draws attention. Slow convinces people it's safe to adapt. At dusk, I set the nets again, but changed their depth by a foot. Fish behavior shifts with water level. If they move shallow, it confirms drop rate beyond what I can see. They did. Nets came up lighter but closer to the surface than expected. That night, I didn't sleep much. Sound travels differently now. Less slap against the dock. More hollow echo from the walls. Around midnight, I heard something I hadn't heard before. A low metallic ring carried across water. Not sharp, not repeated. Like someone tapped steel once and waited. I didn't respond. Secondary rule exists because systems don't change themselves cleanly. Someone turns a valve, clears a blockage, breaks a seal they didn't understand. If someone is reopening drainage, they may not even know this island exists yet. The footprints suggest curiosity, not intent. But curiosity plus access equals convergence. By morning, the strip of rock had widened enough that you could walk 10 yards out before whetstone forced you to stop. Still a gap. Still water between. But less margin. I tightened the anchors again and added a third line to the barge, not for security mass hasn't changed, but for noise. Extra tension changes how movement sounds. If someone approaches, I'll hear the difference sooner. I also made a list in my head of what doesn't come with me if I leave. Anything heavy? Anything loud? Anything that assumes permanence. The quarry is rewriting distance. Slowly. Deliberately. Water is still buying me time. I just don't know who else is spending it. Tertiary rule. When a system drains quietly, don't assume it's emptying. Assume it's being redirected. I confirm the drop before sunrise. I keep a weighted line tied to the underside of the dockhouse, marked in thumb-width increments with shallow cuts. Crude, but it survives corrosion better than anything with numbers on it. Overnight the line showed another 1.5 inches of loss. Too much for seepage. Too clean for coincidence. I didn't go to the shoreline this time. Shorelines teach you what's already happened. I needed to understand what was happening now. The quarry walls are stepped in places where blasting followed seams instead of straight cuts. Those shelves used to hold pump infrastructure, pipes, brackets, cable trays. Most of it is submerged, but as the water drops, geometry reappears. Geometry is memory made visible. Through the scope, I tracked one of the old discharge tunnels on the north wall. Yesterday it was dark and still. This morning, there was movement, not flow, but disturbance. A faint ripple where water entered, not exited. That means pressure is pulling inward there, which means something downstream of that tunnel is open. Before the shutdowns, those tunnels fed into a series of settling channels that eventually drained into a creek beyond the quarry fence. Gravity assisted but controlled by gates and baffles. When power died, most of those gates froze where they were. Some closed, some didn't. If someone has found a way to open even one of them fully, the pit will drain until it reaches a new equilibrium, likely well below my current waterline. That strip of rock will keep growing. Late morning I saw them again. 2 figures on the far shore just beyond the old access road. Binoculars showed backpacks, not rifles. One of them knelt and ran a hand along the exposed stone, then pointed. The others shook their head and stepped back. Their debating approach. Still no attempt to cross. Still no testing. That tells me they don't need to. They're waiting for the water to do the work. I spent the afternoon reinforcing invisibility, not defense. I darkened the dockhouse roof with soot and quarry mud to break the straight lines. I adjusted the angle of the rain catch so runoff didn't leave a clean streak down the siding. I removed one of the dock posts entirely and let the deck cantilever slightly so it looked damaged, not maintained. People approach things that look useful. They ignore things that look broken. At dusk, I ran the generator for exactly 9 minutes. Same hour as always. Same load. Same sound profile. Consistency is camouflage. While it ran, I listened harder than usual. Sound came back sharper, less diffused. The quarry is becoming shallower acoustically as well as physically. Another hidden cost of draining. That night I heard voices clearly for the first time. Not shouting. Talking at a distance, carried clean across the water. They were on the far side, pacing the exposed strip. I couldn't make out words, but I could hear cadence. Short sentences, pauses, one voice more directive than the other. They weren't afraid of being heard. That's confidence built on a belief that water is no longer a barrier. Before sleeping, I moved supplies closer to the barge, not all of them, just enough that relocation would take minutes instead of hours. I also loosened one anchor intentionally and retightened it imperfectly. If someone is watching from shore, the slight list might read as neglect. Tertiary rule isn't about panic, it's about interpretation. If the quarry is draining because a tunnel reopened naturally, the drop will slow as pressure equalizes. If it's being managed cleared, propped, widened, it will continue steadily until someone decides it's enough. That decision won't be mine. By morning, I expect more rock exposed, more people willing to walk it. And eventually, someone will reach the water's edge and do what the others haven't yet. They'll step in. When that happens, the island stops being an island in their heads first. Reality usually follows. 4th rule. When barriers thin, attention thickens. I woke to the sound of water touching places it hadn't touched in months. Not waves, not chop. A faint, irregular lap against stone that used to sit higher. The quarry was quieter overall, but the shoreline had become articulate. Every inch it gained added a new surface for sound to work with. I checked the weighted line before anything else. Another inch gone. The cuts I'd made were now fully exposed down to a mark I never expected to see again. That level corresponded to a maintenance shelf that used to be dry year-round, even during spring melt. Seeing it again meant the pit was no longer behaving like a closed system. I ate cold and watched the far shore through the scope. 4 figures now. 2 from before, plus 2 more, who moved differently. Less tentative, more purposeful. One carried something long and straight. Not a weapon. Too balanced. A pole, maybe, or a length of pipe. They walked the exposed strip without hesitation. No testing, no probing. They know how far it goes now. By mid-morning, one of them stepped into the water. Boot in first, slow, deliberate. They watched the surface, not their footing. Feeling for depth by distortion, not resistance. The water barely reached their ankle before they pulled back and laughed. That sound carried clean across the pit. I stepped away from the edge of the dockhouse immediately. Laughter is a declaration. It tells others the unknown has been reduced to inconvenience. I spent the next hour doing something I'd hoped to avoid, rehearsal. I untied the barge, pushed it clear, then brought it back in without starting the generator. Oars only. Slow, even strokes to see how the water behaved at this new level. The barge grounded sooner than it should have on the east side of the island. A submerged spur of rock was now close enough to kiss the hull. That's a problem. Routes I use without thinking are tightening. Margin is collapsing from below and from outside. I retied the barge and checked the anchors again. 2 of them were now angled enough that tightening them further would lift the dockhouse unevenly. I eased tension instead, letting the structure settle closer to the rock mound. Less freeboard, but more stability if someone tries to board from shallow water. At noon, I heard metal scrape on stone. They were testing the rock strip with the pole, tapping ahead of their steps, measuring firmness. The sound came back sharp and confident. No hollow echo. They'll reach water's edge by tomorrow. Maybe tonight. I ran the generator at the usual hour and watched them while it ran. They stopped and looked out toward the island, heads tilted, listening. One of them pointed. Another shrugged. They didn't wave. They didn't call out. They don't know I'm here yet, or they're pretending not to. Both are bad in different ways. After the generator cycle, I made a decision that cost me comfort. I removed the dock ladder. It's a small thing, but ladders change behavior. Without one, boarding requires commitment, wet clothes, awkward movement, exposure. People delay when they have to improvise. Delay buys time. I also loosened the fasteners on one section of the dock so it would shift slightly under weight, not enough to fail, enough to feel wrong. In the afternoon, clouds moved in low and heavy. The quarry walls trapped the air, thickening sound again. I heard their voices clearly now, even without the scope. They were planning, talking about crossing, about timing. One of them said something that made the decision final. Tomorrow, if it keeps dropping. They're willing to wait. That means I can't. I spent the rest of the day stripping the dockhouse down to essentials. Anything that couldn't move quietly or float got left behind. The stove. Extra lumber. Tools that only matter if you're staying. I cached what I could under the deck, weighted and tied off, in case I had to come back. As night fell, the water dropped another fraction. Not much, but enough that the strip of rock connected in one continuous arc around the pit. An almost causeway. From shore, the island no longer looked isolated. It looked temporarily inconvenient. 4th rule exists because people don't rush barriers when they're solid. They study them. They talk around them. When barriers thin, attention thickens, and attention brings hands. I sat on the barge in the dark and listened to the quarry breathe. Somewhere below the waterline, something was still pulling, redirecting, quietly solving a problem for someone else. I can reinforce this place. Add lines, add obstacles, make it harder to reach for a few more days, or I can leave while water still forces choice. By morning, the water will decide for me if I don't decide first. 5th rule. Once a barrier becomes optional, it's already gone. I didn't wait for morning. The quarry goes quiet before dawn in a way that feels deliberate, like everything is holding still to see what moves first. That's when choices harden. I loaded the barge by touch, not sight. No lantern. No headlamp. Anything that required light wasn't coming with me. I took food, batteries, the small tool roll, nets, line, the spare anchor cable, left the generator, left the stove, left the extra lumber. Weight matters more on water than on land, and I was trading concealment for motion. Before casting off, I checked the weighted line one last time. Another half-inch gone since dusk. That settled it. I pushed off without untying the bowline first, letting the stern swing free so the barge scraped stone and made a sound that blended into the quarry's night noise. Then I slipped the bow loose and let momentum carry me away from the dockhouse without oars for a few seconds. Drift first. Intention later. I didn't head for shore. I angled across the pit toward the deepest section, where the old blast scars drop straight down and the water stays cold and dark longest. Even if the drainage continues, that basin will hold water after the margins turn to walkable stone. Depth preserves uncertainty. I rode slow, shallow strokes. No splash. Let the barge's flat bottom slide instead of cut. Sound carries clean now. I didn't need speed. I needed absence. Halfway across, I stopped rowing entirely and listened. Voices on shore. Closer than before. They were moving, boots on stone, confident. Someone laughed again. Someone else shushed them. That told me enough. I resumed rowing and didn't look back. By the time the sky began to lighten, I was tied off against a sheer wall where the rock drops vertical into the water. No ladder, no shelf, just stone and depth. I set 2 anchors at opposing angles so the barge sat tight without knocking. Movement here reads as echo, not origin. I watched the shoreline through binoculars as the sun came up. They crossed. Not all of them. 2 at first, testing the rock strip like it was a trail they'd always known. Dry boots. Careful steps, but no hesitation. They reached the water's edge and stopped exactly where the prince had stopped the day before. Then one of them stepped in. Ankle deep. Then shin. Then knee. The water barely slowed them. They waited until the rock dropped away and they had to turn back, laughing again, soaked but energized. They didn't look toward the dockhouse. When they did, they saw it. The empty deck. The missing ladder. The slight list I'd introduced on purpose. One of them pointed. Another shaded their eyes. They stood there for a long time, talking. Then they started toward it. That's when I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not because I'd escaped them, but because I'd stopped pretending the island was a permanent solution. Watching them walk where water used to be made it obvious how temporary my advantage had been. The quarry didn't betray me. It just finished a sentence I'd been ignoring. They reached the dockhouse around mid-morning. I watched them step onto the shifting section and pause, recalibrating. One knelt and checked under the deck. Another peered through the doorway. They moved like people used to taking things apart to see how they work. They stayed less than an hour. When they left, they took nothing visible. No supplies, no tools, just knowledge. They walked back along the strip, wet boots darkening the stone behind them. That's worse than theft. By afternoon, the waterline had dropped enough that my old barge route would have grounded if I'd waited. The causeway was real now. Not solid everywhere, but continuous enough to change behavior. I sat against the rock wall and retied knots, not because they needed it, but because repetition steadies thinking. Nets would still work here. Rain catch too. The generator is gone, but batteries last longer when you don't pretend noise is free. Isolation doesn't come from distance anymore. It comes from choosing places people don't want to stop. This wall is one of them. No landing, no easy access, no promise of use. 5th rule holds, once a barrier becomes optional, it's already gone. I didn't lose the island. I outgrew it. The quarry is still draining. Slowly. Quietly. Whatever opened downstream hasn't closed yet. That means more margins will disappear, and new ones will form where depth replaces width. I'll follow the water the way I always have. Not where it's comfortable. Where it still forces a decision. 6th rule. Depth hides longer than distance, but it demands discipline. I stayed along the wall for 3 days. The vertical face does something the island never could. It denies transition. No gradual approach. No place to stand and think. You're either floating, climbing, or leaving. People don't like that. They prefer margins that can test with 1 foot. I use that. Each morning I check the anchors before light hit the water. 2 angles, opposed, load shared so wave slap wouldn't telegraph my position. The quarry amplifies mistakes now. Every knock echoes clean. I patted contact points with cut rubber and old rope until the barge felt dead underfoot. Fishing changed immediately. Nets had to go deeper, closer to the wall where colder water held fish that hadn't followed the receding shoreline yet. I lost 1 net the first night, snagged on submerged blast rubble I couldn't see. I cut it free without hesitation. Retrieval costs more noise than replacement. I smoked nothing. Too risky against bare stone. Everything I caught I ate fresh or salted thin and dried low under the deck where air moved but smell didn't climb. The water kept dropping. Not fast, not dramatic. Just steady enough that every morning revealed new scars on the quarry walls. Rust lines, cable brackets, the tops of old ladders that once disappeared straight into black water. Infrastructure resurfacing like bones. On the 2nd day, I heard them again. Same voices. Same cadence. They were closer to the water now, moving along the new perimeter with purpose. Mapping. Arguing about routes. One of them mentioned the drain, clearly enough that I caught the word across the pit. So they know. Knowledge spreads faster than water ever does. That afternoon, I watched one of them walk out farther than the others, testing the strip where it narrowed. He slipped once, caught himself, laughed it off. That laugh again. The sound of someone converting risk into story. I shifted the barge 5 feet farther along the wall after dark. Same depth, different reflection angles. Even a fixed position becomes readable if you let people watch it long enough. That night, the quarry made a new sound. A low, sustained pull, like breath through a pipe. Not loud, but constant. Water was moving somewhere out of sight with intent. The level dropped another inch before dawn. Sixth rule exists because depth tempts complacency. You start believing no one will bother solving vertical problems when horizontal ones get easier. But people solve problems they believe lead somewhere. And this quarry is leading somewhere now, out. If the pit drains enough, depth won't matter. The wall will become a ramp in sections. Ladders will reconnect. The basin will stop being water first and start being terrain again. I can't let myself anchor to a solution that's already aging. On the fourth morning, I pulled the anchors. Not because they were failing, because staying longer would cost more attention than it bought safety. People were watching the water line now, not the structures. But that won't last. Once the novelty fades, they'll start inventorying what's usable. I don't want to be on that list. I rode again before sunrise, staying tight to shadow and moving only when wind skimmed the surface enough to tear sound apart. This time I headed for the far end of the pit, where the wall breaks into stepped terraces too steep to walk but shallow enough to ground a barge briefly. Not to land. To wait. Depth still hides me. Distance no longer does, so I'm trading both for timing. I tied off, killed motion, and listened to the quarry work itself out. Water keeps leaving. People keep adapting. So will I. But only ahead of the moment when adaptation becomes pursuit. Depth buys time. Discipline decides whether you spend it or waste it. Seventh rule. When a system is collapsing, the most dangerous place is where it almost still works. I stayed on the terraces longer than planned. The stepped wall at the far end of the pit was never meant for access. Its blast geometry angled shelves left behind when they chased bad stone and gave up. Too steep to walk, too uneven to build on, too shallow to feel safe. That combination keeps people from committing. They come close, then choose somewhere easier. That's what I needed. I tied the barge where one shelf dipped just enough to cradle the hull without grounding it fully. Half buoyant, half supported. If the water dropped another foot, I could still push off. If wind picked up, the rock would break the chomp before it reached me. Each morning I measured drop by the exposed rust lines on the wall. Still steady, still draining. No surge, no stall. Whoever opened the system downstream knows enough to let gravity do the work instead of forcing it. That kind of competence narrows margins faster than panic ever does. Fishing got harder here. The terraces disrupt flow, and fish don't like complexity when water levels are unstable. I burn calories for less return. That's acceptable short term, not sustainable. On the second night, I heard voices much closer than before. They weren't on the strip anymore. They were on the terraces, not near me, lower, where the steps are broader and look usable if you squint. I heard stone under boots, the scrape-paws rhythm of people moving carefully but not fearfully. One of them said, "It goes farther than it looks." That sentence tells you everything. They're discovering transitional ground. The kind that convinces you to keep going because retreat feels like wasted effort. I stayed still. No adjustments. No noise. They didn't come up to my level. Not yet. But their presence here means the terraces are no longer neutral ground. They're becoming a route. Routes attract traffic. Traffic attracts mistakes. Mistakes attract attention. I moved again before dawn. This time, I didn't roll across open water. I hugged the wall, advancing in short pulls and rests, using the rock to break reflection and echo. It's slower than crossing, but it keeps my silhouette fractured. I went to the one place in the pit I'd been avoiding, the intake culvert. It sits at the lowest end of the quarry, where the original drainage channel meets the pit wall, a rectangular concrete mouth, half submerged until recently, now breathing air for the first time in years. Water slides past it constantly, faster here than anywhere else. This is where the quarry is emptying. People don't like culverts. They don't like confined concrete, unseen exits, or the idea that water chooses to go somewhere they can't see. Even curious people hesitate. I tied off above it, not directly in front. Far enough to avoid the pull, close enough to hear everything. The sound here is constant. A deep, layered rush that masks smaller noise. If someone approaches, I'll hear the change. Not footsteps, but disruption. I spent the day doing nothing visible, no nets, no generator, no movement beyond what the water forced on me. Late afternoon, someone came close. I heard voices echo off the concrete hollow, wrong. They stood at the edge and argued. One wanted to look inside. Another said no. They compromised by throwing a rock. It vanished into sound, no splash. That ended the debate. They left shortly after. That's the advantage of places that work too well. The risk is obvious even to people who don't understand it fully. But this is also the most dangerous place for me, because when the quarry finishes draining, and it will, this culvert becomes a dry corridor, a way out, a magnet, the place everyone eventually has to deal with. I can't be here when that happens. Seventh rule stands. When a system is collapsing, the most dangerous place is where it almost still works. The island was that place. The terraces are becoming that place. Soon the culvert will be. I'm running out of positions that fail cleanly instead of gradually. Tomorrow, I'll have to choose between following the water out or leaving the quarry entirely while it still scares people enough to stay away. Depth is losing its authority, and authority is the only thing that ever made isolation reliable. Eighth rule. When escape paths reveal themselves, others will follow them before you're ready. I slept in fragments, waking to the culvert's voice every time it changed tone. Water doesn't make one sound, it makes families of them. When flow increases, pitch rises. When debris shifts, the rhythm stutters. When pressure equalizes somewhere downstream, everything smooths out and goes almost quiet. Near dawn, it smoothed, not stopped. Just steadied in a way that felt deliberate, like the system had found a new balance point. That's bad. Balance means predictability, and predictability invites use. I checked the waterline as light crept down the quarry walls. Another inch gone. The culvert mouth was fully exposed now, water streaming through it in a clean, uninterrupted sheet. No turbulence at the edges, no backwash, clear path. I untied and drifted away from it without rowing, letting the current do the work until I was back in shadow along the wall. I didn't want my departure to line up with anyone's arrival. Timing is camouflage. Fishing was pointless now. Nets would snag on newly exposed rubble, and the fish had either moved deeper into the culvert flow or followed the shoreline retreat toward places I didn't want to go. I ate the last of what I'd salted and started counting calories again instead of meals. Mid-morning, I heard them. Not voices this time. Tools. Metal on concrete. Short, controlled impacts. Someone was testing the culvert edge with intent, not curiosity, clearing loose stone, making it safer to approach. They've crossed from watching to modifying. That's the threshold. I moved farther along the wall, closer to the pit's original service ramp, the wide, shallow slope where trucks used to descend before the flooding. It's been underwater long enough that algae slicked it into a death trap, but with the water dropping, sections were drying unevenly. Too slick to walk safely. Too wide to jump across. People will try anyway. From my position, I could see 3 of them now. Same group as before, plus 1 more. They moved in pairs, always leaving someone watching, not panicked, organized. They're not just passing through. They're planning to use the quarry. That makes me obsolete. Isolation here worked because no one needed this place. Now it's becoming a corridor, a solution, a way out of something else. Solutions attract traffic faster than shelter ever does. I spent the afternoon doing the hardest kind of work, deciding what not to save. I cut loose half my spare line and let it sink. Too bulky, too distinctive. I dropped the heavier nets entirely. I even considered abandoning the barge too recognizable, too readable. But it's still my best tool for crossing uncertainty. I'll keep it until it becomes a liability. At dusk, the water dropped enough that the service ramp emerged in broken patches. One of them tested it and nearly went down hard. The others laughed, then backed off. Lessons learned without consequence. Those are the most dangerous lessons. That night, I heard shouting from outside the quarry, distant, echoing down through the drainage channel. The culvert carried it like a throat. Something is happening downstream. If the quarry is becoming a way through, people will start using it as such. Entry on one side, exit on the other. Continuous flow. I can't survive inside a flow. I waited until full dark, then moved again. This time, not deeper, not sideways. Toward the exit, not to use it, but to scout it. I rode to within sight of the culvert without approaching head-on. The concrete walls there are stained with old watermarks and graffiti from before. I tied off above, climbed carefully onto a narrow ledge, and lay flat to listen. Beyond the culvert, I could hear open space, wind, trees, a creek swollen by redirected flow. The quarry is draining into a living system now, not just empty ground. That means the water will keep going until something downstream stops it, or until the pit reaches that level too. Either way, this place will not remain transitional for long. It will become passable terrain. Eighth rule stands: when escape paths reveal themselves, others will follow them before you're ready. I have a narrow window where the culvert is known but still feared. Once fear turns into familiarity, every advantage I have collapses at once. Tomorrow, I'll have to decide whether to exit ahead of them, or vanish back into the quarry's last pockets of depth and accept whatever end comes with them. Water bought me time. Time is almost spent. Ninth rule: corridors erase neutrality. I didn't leave at first light. Leaving early would have lined my movement up with theirs, and alignment is how you get seen even when no one is looking for you. I waited until the quarry settled into its daytime rhythm. Voices carrying, tools clinking, water noise flattening everything into a steady background hum. Only then did I move. I pushed the barge away from the wall without rowing, letting the current slide me along the last deep pocket like debris that hadn't decided where to go yet. I stayed low, kept the hull angled so it read as driftwood from shore. At this water level, perception matters more than concealment. I didn't head straight for the culvert. Instead, I traced the inside edge of the service ramp where it meets the wall, staying just far enough out to avoid grounding. The ramp is treacherous now. Algae slick stone drying in uneven patches, but it's also loud. Anyone walking there announces themselves. Anyone floating nearby blends in. From this angle, I could see the group clearly. 5 now. They'd established a pattern. 2 near the culvert, 1 on the ramp acting as spotter, 2 farther back hauling gear down from the old access road. Crates. Fuel cans. 1 wheeled dolly that immediately proved useless and got abandoned. This isn't exploration anymore. They're setting up throughput. The quarry isn't shelter to them. It's infrastructure. That realization tightened something in my chest I hadn't felt since the pumps first went silent. A sense of being replaced by a system that doesn't need you anymore. I was useful here when water was a problem. Now water is the solution. I edged closer to the culvert wall, still out of sight, and listened. They were talking about downstream conditions. A bridge washed out. A town partially blocked by debris. The culvert offered a bypass dry feet, controlled passage, fewer dead. They don't know what reopening that drainage really does long-term. They don't care. Short-term utility always wins. By midday, 1 of them went through, not far. Just a few steps into the culvert, testing footing, shine of headlamp bouncing off damp concrete. He came back grinning, reported shallow water and clear air. Fear is evaporating. That's when I made the decision. I'm not leaving through the culvert. Corridors don't stay optional. Once they're known, they turn into funnels. Funnels collect noise, bodies, mistakes. If I follow them out, I inherit every problem they drag in behind them. Instead, I'm leaving sideways again. There's one last place in the quarry that still behaves like water, not land. The sump. It's the deepest point of the pit, drilled straight down where groundwater pressure was worst. A dark well cut into stone, ringed with rusted pipe collars and half-submerged grating. When pumps ran, it was a controlled abyss. When they stopped, it filled first and drained last. Even now, with the water dropping everywhere else, the sump stays deep, cold, uninviting. People don't go near it unless they have to. I waited until afternoon wind picked up, then moved fast for the first time in weeks. Not reckless, just decisive. Short, hard strokes, barge skimming across open water that still existed only here. I tied off well away from the grating and killed all movement. The sound down here is different. Lower, thicker. The water absorbs instead of reflecting. The quarry walls feel farther apart even though they're not. I spent the rest of the day stripping the barge again. More gear gone. More weight surrendered. Anything that assumes I'll be hauling or returning gets left. From here on, everything I keep must work in 2 states, floating and carried. As dusk fell, I heard a shout echo down from the culvert, followed by laughter. Someone else went through, maybe 2. Traffic has started. The sump water dropped less than half an inch overnight. That's the difference between drainage and depth. Depth resists change until the very end. Ninth rule holds, corridors erase neutrality. The quarry is no longer a place you pass through carefully. It's becoming a place you move through by default. I won't be part of that default. Tomorrow, I'll decide whether to stay with the water until it finally abandons me, or leave this pit in a direction no one else is watching. Either way, I won't be exiting where everyone else is entering. That's how you survive transitions, not by being early, by being elsewhere. 10th rule. When everyone agrees on the way forward, look for the way that isn't being discussed. I stayed at the sump through the night, not because it was comfortable, it wasn't, but because it was informational. The deepest water tells the truth last. If the sump starts dropping fast, everything else has already failed upstream. It didn't. By dawn, the water line on the pipe collar showed less than half an inch of change. The flow noise was steady, not accelerating. Whatever had been opened downstream was drawing from higher levels first. Gravity always does that. The sump is the emergency reserve of the pit, whether anyone intends it to be or not. That buys me time. I use the morning to do careful inventory, not of supplies but of exit vectors. The culvert is compromised, too visible, too useful. It will become loud, crowded, and eventually dangerous in ways that have nothing to do with the dead. People funnel problems. The service ramp is worse. Slippery now, but once it dries enough, it becomes a road again, and roads bring certainty, seeking behavior. Certainty is how mistakes scale. The terraces are transitional. They invite foot traffic and modification. Already happening. That leaves one direction. The high wall opposite the culvert, where the quarry face rises sheer and broken, with old blast scars that never connected to anything useful. No ladders, no pipes. No remembered purpose. Just fractured stone and narrow ledges that end abruptly. People don't look at that wall and think exit. They think edge. I ferried the barge along the sump perimeter toward that face, staying low and letting the hull drift where possible. The closer I got, the quieter it felt, not because sound wasn't carrying, but because there was less to bounce off. Irregular stone eats echo. I tied off at a point where a collapsed section of wall had created a jagged ramp of rock just above the waterline, too steep to walk, too broken to climb easily, but not impossible if you know how to move weight without committing it all at once. I climbed a few feet and stopped. Test. Listen. Test again. The rock was solid limestone, not the crumbly overburden that fails unpredictably. Cold stable, dry where exposed. It hadn't been underwater long enough to rot into slipperiness like the ramp. I came back down and waited. By midday, the culvert traffic had increased. I could hear voices clearly now, people calling directions, arguing about loads, laughing when someone slipped but didn't fall. That's a system gaining confidence. Confidence attracts followers. I used that noise as cover. I loaded only what I could carry on my back without compromising balance. Net's gone. Spare cable gone. Half the battery's gone. If I can't lift it onto a ledge with one hand, it doesn't come. I beached the barge deliberately against the rockfall ramp and left it there, untied, unhidden. A visible solution I no longer needed. People will assume I used the culvert if they see the barge abandoned. They won't look up. The climb took time, not because it was technically hard, but because it demanded patience. 3 points of contact always. No dynamic moves. No jumping gaps. Weight placed and tested before transfer. I moved like water climbs, finding cracks, pausing, redistributing load. Halfway up, I stopped and pressed my cheek to the stone. It was cold, but even. No vibration. No hollow resonance. This wall isn't part of the drainage system. It doesn't owe water anything. That matters. By late afternoon, I reached a narrow ledge wide enough to sit and wide enough to stay out of sight from below. From there, I could see the pit clearly. The culvert had turned into a workplace. Crates stacked, gear drying, people moving back and forth with purpose. The sump was ignored. Depth has lost its authority. Utility has replaced it. I stayed on the ledge through the night, anchored to nothing but friction and judgment. Cold crept in slowly, but that's manageable. Falling isn't. At dawn, I climbed again. Above this wall, the quarry ends abruptly in scrub and broken ground that was never meant to see traffic, No paths, no memory. Just land that doesn't promise anything. That's what I'm looking for now. 10th rule holds: when everyone agrees on the way forward, look for the way that isn't being discussed. The quarry is becoming a solution. I'm leaving before solutions turn into obligations. 11th rule: when you leave a system, don't carry its logic with you. The climb out took most of the morning. Not because the rock stayed difficult, but because the transition at the top was wrong, in a way I hadn't felt since the water first started dropping. Quarries end abruptly. One moment you're inside a shaped space where gravity has been negotiated with explosives and planning, and the next you're back on land that never agreed to anything. That boundary matters. I stopped just below the rim and listened before committing weight over it. Sound from the pit carried up clearly. Voices, metal, movement. Sound from above was scattered, thin, unorganized. Wind through scrub. A bird. Nothing that suggested structure. Good. I pulled myself over and stayed low, crawling until the ground leveled into fractured limestone and sparse brush. No tracks. No compacted soil. This side of the quarry hasn't been useful to anyone in a long time. That's the point. I moved away from the edge without standing, keeping my silhouette broken until the pit fell out of direct view. Only then did I get upright and adjust the pack. My shoulders protested immediately. The load felt heavier on land than it ever did on water. Different physics, different penalties. I didn't head toward the road. That's the reflex everyone has, the idea that roads lead somewhere and somewhere is better than nowhere. Roads are just funnels with history. Everything bad knows how to use them. Instead, I paralleled the quarry rim at a distance, staying high enough to avoid the drainage influence but low enough that scrub and broken stone interrupted long sight lines. I moved until the pit noise faded into something abstract, then another hour past that for safety. Around midday I stopped and took inventory again. Food, light but adequate for several days. Water, limited now. No more rain catch. I'd have to find flow. Tools, minimal. Cutting and tying only. Power, whatever was left in the smallest battery. That last one bothered me more than it should have. Habit, not need. I buried the battery under a rock cairn and left it. Not because it wouldn't be useful, but because I don't want to keep solving problems the way I did in the quarry. Power implies noise. Noise implies cycles. Cycles imply predictability. Predictability is what turned a pit into a corridor. The land here rolls gently away from the quarry, broken by shallow gullies and stands of stunted trees. I followed one gully until I found water, not a stream, just seepage pooling over stone before disappearing again. Slow. Clean enough. I drank sparingly and moved on. By late afternoon, clouds built again, darker this time. Real weather, not transitional. I found a shallow cut where rock overhung just enough to break rain and settled there without building anything. No fire. No light. As night fell, I heard distant sound from the quarry again. Not close, but louder than it should have been for the distance. Engines. Generators, maybe. Multiple. They're committing to the corridor. Powering it. Making it permanent. That confirmed the decision more than any fear could have. I slept poorly but deeply, the way you do when the body knows the environment has changed completely and old threat models no longer apply. In the morning, the rain had come and gone. Tracks were erased. The ground smelled new. I stood and oriented myself not by where I'd been, but by what the land offered ahead: broken ground, irregular water, no straight lines. 11th rule stands. When you leave a system, don't carry its logic with you. I'm not a pump operator anymore. I'm not an island. I'm not a node in someone else's solution. The quarry will empty. The corridor will harden. People will move through it and call it survival. I won't. I'll move where nothing invites certainty, where water doesn't promise safety or passage, where ground changes just enough to keep me honest. Tomorrow I'll keep going, not away from the pit, away from the kind of thinking that made me stay too long once already. 12th rule: survival is not about staying hidden. It's about staying irrelevant. This is the final part of the record. I didn't wake with urgency. That alone told me I'd crossed the boundary I needed to cross. When danger is immediate, the body does the scheduling. When it isn't, you get to choose again. I broke camp without erasing it. No fire ring, no structure, nothing to erase beyond the depression where I'd slept. Rain and wind would finish the job soon enough. I don't need to disappear theatrically. I just need to not accumulate. I moved away from the quarry without angling sharply. Sharp angles imply intention. I followed broken ground that forced small decisions every few minutes. Step here, not there, cross now, wait, accept wet boots to avoid a slope that feels too clean. By midday, I could no longer hear anything from the pit. No engines, no voices, no echo. That mattered more than distance. The land here doesn't reward patterns. Gullies dead end into scrub. Scrub opens onto bare stone. Stone drops into shallow basins that collect water briefly and then give it back to the ground. Nothing holds long enough to become infrastructure. I drank from seepage again, filtered slow through cloth and patience. I ate less than I wanted. Hunger sharpens assessment when it doesn't tip into panic. I stayed cold on purpose. Heat invites settling. As the day went on, something subtle shifted in my thinking. I stopped calculating how fast the quarry was draining. Stopped wondering how many people were using the culvert. Stopped modeling outcomes downstream. Those questions belonged to a system I had exited. What replaced them were smaller checks. Is the ground responding the same way twice? Does the wind behave consistently across this cut? Can I leave this position without correcting for mistakes I haven't made yet? That's the scale I can afford now. Near evening, I reached a low ridge that overlooked nothing useful. No roads, no watercourse worth naming, just land folding into itself quietly. I stopped there because nothing pulled me forward or back. That's rare. I didn't build shelter. I found a place where rock leaned just enough to break wind and accepted it. No adjustments, no improvement. Improvement invites ownership, and ownership invites defense. As the light faded, I thought about the dockhouse for the first time all day. Not with regret, with clarity. It worked because it was irrelevant until it wasn't. The island held until water stopped enforcing distance. The quarry hid me until it became useful to others. That's the pattern. Places don't fail you. They just succeed for someone else. The dead were never the main threat there. They rarely are. They move when pushed, stop when stuck, and follow gradients without memory. They don't solve problems. People do. And every solved problem creates pressure somewhere else. I don't know where I'll end up next. I don't need to. I'll stay where movement costs thought. Where water doesn't promise passage. Where ground refuses to flatten into paths. If this record ends here, it's because I've returned to a mode that doesn't benefit from documentation. Writing implies stability. Stability implies audience. Audience implies relevance. I don't need any of that. I survived the quarry by leaving before it finished becoming useful. I survived the island by recognizing when isolation was no longer enforced by physics. I survived the water by remembering that it never keeps what it gives. From here on, I'll survive by staying uninteresting, not hidden, not defended, just not worth solving. That's the only kind of safety that scales when systems collapse. Everything else is temporary,